What I want to do today is share my very personal reflection on the database. So what you'll see is me thinking with the database, sharing my expertise with pre-existing digitized materials from West Africa, how they integrate with the database that you, Frederick, put together. So it's going to be a little bit idiosyncratic, but it's really going to be basically me talking to the database and thinking about it. Just give me a second. What should I do? Let me see. Oh, maybe something's happening up there, but not on the screen. Yeah. I think we can have it this way. Can you see the slides? So there's technical problem. Give us a second. Okay, sure. Okay, so let me start giving my own kind of overview of what I think is great in this collection. So obviously this is a unique collection in terms of amount of materials that cover the history and the intellectual life of Muslims in West Africa in the 20th and the 21st century. And the thing that I really kind of that really attracted my attention right away was the focus on countries that tend to be less represented in the literature. That's why you can see here that I listed Burkina Faso with roughly 161 pages, not entries, pages. Benin 65, Cote d'Ivoire 33, Togo 11, and here I'm excluding Nigeria and Niger simply because regions tend to be more represented or maybe closer to my own area's expertise. So they were more or less kind of striking for me in the database. So this is not obviously the first database of digitized materials from the continent. I'm thinking of a similar project that is, for instance, the African Online Digital Library from Michigan State University that in regards to West Africa covers mostly Ghana, Senegal, and the Gambia. There is, for instance, some materials on democracy in Ghana or coexistence of Muslim and non-Muslims in Ghana, court materials from the Gambia, etc. But obviously, these are countries that, once again, tend to be more represented in scholarship. And then, obviously, the focus here is not on Muslims. It's way more general. And as a scholar of African Muslim societies, obviously, the database is particularly appealing for me. Now, what I want to underline is that African Muslims are actually very well represented in the digital world right now, with an over-focus on the manuscripts. So especially, the often exoticized the manuscripts of Timbuktu. You can see here a quite iconic picture on here on my left of the Abdul Qadir Haidara from Timbuktu sitting, literally in between hundreds of manuscripts. And I mean, there's nothing wrong in working with manuscripts. I work with, West African manuscripts and the manuscripts of Timbuktu. As you can see here, a picture of me doing research, in fact, not in Mali, but in Ivory Coast with my colleague, Dr. Mohamed Jegayete. But I want to underline how the manuscript became so influential in this project of digitization by highlighting two moments that I think are really crucial in the emergence of this international interest in the manuscripts from West Africa. So the first one is this very famous episode of Henry Louis Gates Jr. Wonders of the African World, The Road to Timbuktu, that was published in 1999, in which Henry Gates Louis Jr. Arrives in Timbuktu, basically, and there is a very iconic moment in which he's sitting, with some scholars from Timbuktu who show him thousands, literally, of Arabic manuscripts, and it gets quite emotional in a way, and it says, throughout my education and in my teaching career, I've always thought that Black Africans didn't know writing before the arrival of the Europeans, and now this proves that all of that I learned that I was teaching was wrong. So this very iconic moment that triggered, a series of, projects that were sponsored by North American foundations to work on the manuscripts. And then a second very important moment is the beginning of the war in Mali in 2012, war that in fact unfortunately never stopped in Mali, and especially with these concerning news about the possibilities that the war, generally speaking, might have destroyed the manuscripts of Timbuktu. This led to a very famous process of basically, it's often referred to as the smuggling of the manuscripts out of Timbuktu in Bamako. And this is a process in which Germany is actually figuring as a prominent actor, because immediately after the move of the manuscript from Timbuktu into the capital, the Foreign Office, along with some foundations, through the Center for Manuscript Studies at University of Hamburg, which is hosting me right now as a visiting fellow, started a series of work, like, for instance, of providing infrastructure, organizing collections on the ground, supporting work of indexing and listing of the manuscripts that eventually prepared the way to some major projects of digitization, on which I'll come back in a second. But I just want to acknowledge that, in fact, prior to 2012, there has been another major project of digitization, in fact, of microfilms from mostly Mauritania, that was conducted by the University of Freiburg and University of Tübingen, that basically digitized the manuscripts that were collected in the decades before by Rebstock, Oswald, and Meyer, again in Mauritania. Going back to the Center for Manuscript Studies in Hamburg, the center really provided the infrastructure for another major actor in the digital world to digitize the manuscripts from Timbuktu, which is the Hill Museum and Manuscript Libraries. So this is not a project that only focuses on West Africa or on Muslims. This is a kind of a worldwide project of digitization of manuscripts from many different manuscript traditions that after the beginning of the war and through the collaboration with the University of Hamburg and often with the support of German funding, digitize very large numbers of manuscripts from Timbuktu. You can see it here, but this is actually quite too small for me. There is more than basically, I would say we get to more than 50,000 Arabic manuscripts that were digitized from Timbuktu, some from Jenne, it is a city in Mali, south of Timbuktu, and that are continuously uploaded in open access on the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library reading room, and they've been cataloged systematically by their local team of catalogers. But of course, this is not only projects of digitization of these materials from West Africa. Some of you might be familiar with the Endangered Archives program that is run by the British Library, that also is not focusing exclusively on West Africa, doesn't focus exclusively on manuscript, doesn't focus exclusively on Arabic manuscript or Arabic-based manuscripts. But if we take a look, for instance, and I just took a snapshot of the map on their website, these are all the locations in West Africa in which the Endangered Archives Project has had projects in the past. And you can see that the ones from Mali, at least 3 of them from Mali involves manuscripts. Several from Senegal, Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau involve Arabic manuscripts. I mean, a good friend, Falun Gong from Boston University, only got by himself like 5 of these projects. In Nigeria, the Kaduna, there is some projects in Kano are on Arabic manuscripts. The one in Cote d'Ivoire by Dr. Moussa Konate is on Arabic manuscripts. So again, the Arabic manuscript prominently figures in these projects. And I'm guilty in a way myself of overflowing the internet with Arabic manuscripts. And a little bit of self-promotion here with this project that we called Maktaba. It's a shared project between my university, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and Northwestern University in Evanston, which are basically starting a database of Arabic manuscripts, but also translation into English of these manuscripts, along with introductory essays, with an attempt basically to broaden the audience of people who can actually access this manuscript through translation and contextual pieces. Because we often find ourselves with a lot of digital images, but not that many people who can actually work with these manuscripts because there is no basically language expertise by general audiences, undergraduate students, etc. However, I think that if from the one side, for somebody like me, the specialist of Arabic manuscripts, this is fantastic, I also think that this creates a paradox. So this, this over-presence of Arabic manuscripts, I think might convey the idea that older materials are more important, and so they need attention and they need digital preservation. While newer, which I'm here putting actually in quotes, because oftentimes, some of these manuscripts are not that old because the manuscript tradition is a live tradition in West Africa. So you might have actually some of the old manuscripts from Timbuktu that are actually newer than the new newspapers that you can find in this database. And this also has another consequence, is that newer things, or perceivably newer things might get lost, while allegedly older things are getting preserved. So that's one big problem for me. The second, I think that by creating this fiction between the manuscripts in need of preservation and other stuff that are not really in need of preservation, we are creating binaries, fictional binaries, between, again, the old and the new, manuscript and print, what we consider as traditional and what is modern, what is precious and what is less precious. But obviously a database like the Islamic West Africa database demonstrates that there is a lot of precious materials in newspapers, in Islamic publications, but I also found very useful, actually, and you kind of mentioned some of these already, Frederick, like the references to scholarship, both published and unpublished materials, some of which you actually have also in PDF accessible on the database, access to visual and audio materials, also the application of digital humanities that you showed us, and I can only imagine the potential of the digital humanities applied to the database, very useful indexes and search engines. So what I did, in the past weeks, I kind of spent sometimes literally playing around with the database and seeing what attracted my attention, out of the database. Now, unfortunately, since I cannot do like item by item and kind of spoiling everything, so you can see all of the things that I found interesting. Well, first of all, the curated exhibitions are actually very useful tools for somebody who doesn't, really know where to start. But I mean, look at the current situation. For instance, I was looking through the Palestine in West African Islamic newspapers, and I found at least 20 entries. So that could be like the beginning of like a study of how Palestine or the conflict was represented or has been represented across time in West African Islamic newspapers. Then as a specialist of Mali, I could not put Mali, and actually, despite Mali not being among the main countries represented, in fact, there's 500 entries on Mali. I must say, I also Googled Mauro Nobili. There is one entry on me, but I didn't put it on the slide. Then, for instance, I did find also some interesting reference to visual materials. Like, for instance, there is this documentary, Muslims in Mango in Northern Togo. Really want to watch it. It's about writing practices in Northern Togo. And then if Frederick is a lover of tennis, I love football. So I did some research for football in the database. And actually 65 items came out, especially from Burkina Faso. So reading through these newspapers, I mean, there was this story, which was fantastic, of this 13 June 1998, I was turning 17 at the time, when there is apparently this cup of the Franco-Arab schools in Burkina Faso, with this incredible final between the Nureddin school and the Khairia that finished with penalty shootouts 5-4. It must have been really excruciating pain for the Khairia supporters. So again, there's a lot that can be done with the database. But I think the database has also some less evident lessons for people interested in studying West Africa. First of all, it's true that database saves people from going, to libraries, but in order to produce such a database, the team has spent so much time doing field work. So databases do not replace field work. We cannot just sit, in Hamburg, in Berlin, in Illinois, and do research, but field work is crucial. And, these projects actually demonstrate the importance of that. And the second thing, I also want to underline that once things get the visibility through a database, we're also making visible those materials who don't make it into databases. So I want to use an example, and I'm sorry if I go back systematically to the manuscript, but that's my comfort zone. So we've been talking about 100,000 of items, roughly, you know, putting together all of these projects that have digitized manuscript from Timbuktu, but I still haven't found in any digital collection, for instance, the original seal of this scholar from Timbuktu, Ahmed al-Bakai, from the famous scholarly family of the Punta in Timbuktu from the 1850s. So this is a very interesting letter that was written by Ahmed al-Bakai himself. But what you can see here up to the, on the top left, I guess, of the image, on the top right of the image, is the actual seal that was given to Ahmed al-Bakai in Timbuktu by the British through the consulate in Tripoli, what is today's Libya. So this is the seal that was produced for West Africa by the British at the time in which the British had interest into West Africa, but they were actually being kind of advanced in their interest by the French, who were actually military conquering West Africa. So I think this is interesting to see how many very important historical materials are actually not to be found in database, which means that we need to expand these databases. So if we put together like these materials that we are now seeing through a database like Islam in West Africa collection, along with the materials that have been already present online, especially the manuscripts, I think we can actually start appreciating in a more holistic view, you know, the intellectual vibrancy of West African Muslims that is not bound to format, the manuscript, the print, the DVD, the audio recording, nor can be represented, you know, this kind of binaries of tradition or authentic materials. And I want to finish my presentation with two little anecdotes that I really think show this complexity and cross-pollination between all of these materials. So I don't know if the video that I have, the 5-second, 10-second video would work. Otherwise, I will only use the second one. So I'll give it a try. If it doesn't work, I skip it and go to the last slide. Let's see what happens here. So this is a recitation of the Maulid, the birth of the Prophet in Timbuktu. It was given to me by a very good colleague and friend of mine, Abdul Wahid Larao Haidara from Timbuktu. And what I really like in this, that you can see people here reciting praise poetry, some with manuscripts, some reading from a cell phone, some reading from photocopies, some reading from print book. And you can see on the walls posters, etc. The complexity of West African Muslim lives. Let's see if it works. Just for you to take a look at Timbuktu during the celebration of the Maulid. I'm going to introduce the last slide, otherwise the function of not showing item by item is gonna kind of ruin the final joke of the presentation. So while I was doing research on a collection of manuscripts in West Africa, I found a very interesting manuscript that was actually showed to me by my former mentor, Shamil Jeppi, in Cape Town. That is the Tarikh Dukhul al-Shaifi in Maghreb. So the history of the introduction of tea in Morocco. Very fascinating stuff. So I went through the manuscripts that at the end, I'm not able to move this anymore. At the end of the manuscripts, I actually discovered that this handwritten manuscript is copied from a newspaper articles, from a newspaper in Morocco called the Saada, issue 1896, 1st March 1951. Thank you very much.